My name is Emily Parker, and up until a couple of years ago, I would have sworn my life was ordinary, painfully ordinary, even. I lived in a quiet suburban neighborhood just outside of Maplewood, a small town where the biggest disaster anyone ever discussed was a lost dog or a mailbox smashed by teenagers on Halloween. I had the kind of routine life people in movies like to call peaceful. A husband who, back then, still kissed me before leaving for work. A little boy who loved dinosaurs and insisted they slept sitting upright. A small house with a white porch railing, a vegetable garden I never really had time to maintain, and a job at a local accounting office that paid the bills, but never quite filled my soul. I used to complain that life felt predictable, stable, safe. It turns out, stability is something you don't appreciate until the ground beneath your feet begins to rot quietly, invisibly, long before you feel it give way. And for me, everything began to rot, quite literally. It started around 2 years ago, at the peak of winter, the kind of winter where the air feels like broken glass against your lungs, and every sound seems sharper in the cold. One morning, I walked into the kitchen and froze. The ceiling, the windows, the walls, they were all crawling. Huge black flies, the kind you only ever see in summer, buzzing around trash cans and rotting carcasses, covered my kitchen like a living, pulsing shadow. They droned in a deep, stomach-churning hum, wings vibrating against the glass, clinging to the refrigerator, clustering above the sink. Then, just as suddenly as they appeared, they were gone. No bodies to sweep up. No trace they'd ever been there at all. Just silence, a silence crawling with questions. At first, everyone said the same thing. Maybe something died in the walls. Maybe you left food out. Maybe you're exaggerating, Emily. But I wasn't exaggerating. And I wasn't imagining it. Because it kept happening, without warning, without logic, without any earthly explanation. Swarms of black flies would appear, flood my home like a living omen, and then simply vanish. We called pest control. We called city inspectors. We even called a building commission. No one found anything. Then things got worse. Food in the refrigerator, groceries bought an hour earlier, perfectly sealed, perfectly fine, would spoil as if weeks had passed. Milk curdled within minutes. Cheese turned green. Meat bled black. Soups I had just finished cooking would sour before I could even set the table. Bread turned to mold in 3 hours. Doctors couldn't explain why my son kept getting sick either. Constant fever. Endless coughs. Strange bruises appearing overnight. Every week it was something new. Antibiotics barely worked. He cried more. Slept less. I slept less. And my husband? Well, he simply stopped trying to make sense of anything. Instead of standing beside me, he began stepping away. First emotionally, then physically. Until one night right before New Year's, he walked out of our house entirely. He didn't just leave me. He left for my best friend. And somehow, that betrayal hurt less than everything happening inside the house. Because betrayal is human. Predictable. Understandable. What was happening in my home was not. Work collapsed next. Clients refused to work with me without explanation. Numbers in reports I triple-checked began mysteriously containing errors. I forgot things I'd never forgotten before. My boss said I looked drained. Co-workers whispered. My hands shook. Sometimes I would stand in the bathroom mirror for minutes, not recognizing the pale, hollow-eyed woman staring back. And then there was the night that broke me. It was December 31st. The sky was cracking with fireworks. Laughter echoed through the neighborhood. And then a stray firework, a single screaming spark, landed in our yard. It hit the small wooden shed where we kept supplies and, at the time, livestock. The flames spread too fast, too bright, like the wood had been waiting to burn. I ran. I screamed. I tried to force the door open, but it jammed, stuck like it was welded shut. From inside came the most horrifying sound I have ever heard in my life. Not animal screams. Human ones. They shrieked. Pleaded. Sobbed. The sound was wrong, twisted, like something was imitating a human voice but didn't quite know how. My hands blistered on the handle. My throat tore from screaming. Neighbors watched frozen in horror. By the time the fire department arrived, it was already over. The shed burned to nothing. The screams faded into silence. And something inside me snapped. That night, standing in the freezing air while the smell of burnt flesh and smoke wrapped around my home, I realized something with absolute, bone-deep clarity. This wasn't bad luck. This wasn't coincidence. And it definitely wasn't just life. Something had come into my home. And it wanted more. I didn't waste any more time. After everything that had happened, after the fire, after the screams that didn't sound quite human, something inside me broke loose from denial. I realized I wasn't safe. My home wasn't safe. My child wasn't safe. So I did the only thing a terrified mother could do. I sent my kid away. I packed a bag so quickly my hands shook, zipped coats up to a trembling chin, kissed a pale forehead that had been feverish for weeks, and put my child on a morning bus to stay with family in another city. Somewhere far enough that whatever was infecting my house wouldn't follow. At least, that's what I prayed. On January 1st, when the world was still heavy with frost and hangovers, when people were still clinging to their New Year's resolutions and illusions of fresh beginnings, I did something I never imagined myself doing. I went looking for help from someone people whispered about. Someone they didn't laugh at out loud, but never mentioned twice in daylight conversations. Her name was Maria Delgado. Locals called her Grandma Maria, although she wasn't really that old, more ageless. People said she was one of those women who sees things. The kind suburban towns pretend don't exist, even though they always do. I expected something theatrical, candles, smoke, bones hanging from strings, maybe a house that looked like it wanted to fall apart. Instead, I walked into a surprisingly ordinary home. Warm light. A faint smell of laundry detergent. A floral couch. A cat sleeping peacefully in a sun patch. Nothing mystical. Nothing threatening. Just normal. So normal it felt wrong. Maria herself didn't look like the kind of woman who dealt in shadows. Not a witch. Not a crank. She was tidy. Pleasant. Soft white sweater, dark hair streaked with silver pulled into a neat braid. She offered me tea. Asked if I wanted sugar. Smiled kindly. For a moment, I felt stupid for even coming. I hadn't said a word yet. And then, she finally spoke. She didn't look at me. She looked through me. Her expression shifted. Softness drained from her eyes, replaced by something ancient. Something that made the air feel thicker. Her lips parted, and in a steady, eerily calm voice she said, "There's something dark on you, Emily. Someone has done this to you." My stomach dropped. I hadn't told her anything. Not a single word. Not about the flies. Not about the rotting food. Not about the sickness. Not about the fire. Not even why I was there. But she knew. What followed wasn't a conversation. It was more like surgery. She asked questions in slow, careful tones while studying my hands, my shoulders, my face. She barely blinked. And with each breath, the room seemed quieter, as if the world outside had stepped back to give space to whatever she was doing. She told me the truth I had secretly feared. It wasn't random. It wasn't fate. It wasn't coincidence. It was intentional. A curse. Heavy. Calculating. Crafted with purpose. Someone close to you did this, she said softly. Someone who once cared about you, or pretended to. She paused. Then added, almost reluctant. Most likely, a woman. The words punched the air out of me. A woman. Someone I trusted. Someone who knew me well enough to aim for my life. The room felt suddenly smaller. The walls closer. The light dimmer. My hands wouldn't stop shaking. Maria worked quietly after that, lighting something that snapped and hissed when it burned, whispering in a language that didn't sound entirely human. She tied threads. Drew symbols. Pressed something cold against my wrists. At one point, I swear I felt something move against my spine, like a breath that didn't belong to my body. Eventually, the air shifted. Something loosened. Like an invisible pressure around my chest had eased, if only a little. When it was over, Maria finally leaned back, exhausted in a way that looked deeper than physical. She gave me instructions. 2 rituals. Simple on the surface, terrifying in meaning. The first was meant to draw the one who cursed me to my home, to force the hand behind all this suffering to come into the open. The second ritual was designed to send the curse back, to return every ounce of rot, every whisper, every shadow, every scream, to the one who sent it. She warned me to follow her directions exactly. No hesitation, no improvising, no deviation. I nodded. I promised. I wanted my life back. I wanted my child safe. I wanted it to stop. So I went home. I did everything exactly as Maria told me. Or at least, I thought I did. This is where I have to pause. Because something changed after that night. Something huge. Something irreversible. And I don't know if it was my mistake. Or hers. Or if whatever was feeding on my life simply didn't like being challenged. But from the moment I finished those rituals, things didn't just get worse. They stopped being humanly describable. Calling what followed horror would be an insult. Calling it a nightmare would be mercy. It was something far beyond either of those. Something that made horror look merciful. Something that made nightmares jealous. No one came. Not the next morning. Not that evening. Not the day after. Not even a week later. And just as suddenly as all the disasters had poured into my life, they seemed to stop. The refrigerator stayed cold. Food stayed fresh. No flies. No sickness. No whispers at night. No shadows moving when they shouldn't. Work smoothed out. Emails made sense again. Co-workers stopped staring. My hands stopped trembling when I held a mug. It felt wrong to admit it, but life somehow began quietly stitching itself back together. For the first time in months, I could breathe without counting the seconds between breaths. I caught myself humming while washing dishes. I slept, not peacefully, but at least deeply enough not to wake up sweating and gasping. There were mornings I actually believed, maybe, Maria's ritual had worked. Maybe the darkness had lost interest. Maybe I had survived. But I celebrated too soon. I should have known that when something evil retreats, it isn't surrender. It's patience. It was January 9th. A quiet, freezing night. The kind where the world outside feels hollow and fragile, like if you breathed too hard the air itself might shatter. I was getting ready for bed, brushing my teeth, turning off lights, smoothing blankets like normal people do when they still believe life holds normal nights for them. I checked the clock. 11:03 p.m. That's when I heard it. A knock. Not loud. Not frantic. Just deliberate. 3 slow strikes. The kind of knock that suggests the person on the other side isn't asking for permission. They're announcing themselves. For a moment, I froze in the hallway. My brain scrambled for something rational. Neighbor needing help, delivery left at the wrong house, maybe even my husband. No, not my husband. He didn't come to this house anymore. The dog, usually explosive at even the faintest sound near the porch, remained completely silent. That unnerved me more than the knock. Silence, in a house with a dog, is never neutral. It's agreement. I approached the door slowly, every step feeling heavier than it should. My heart hammered so loud I swear I could feel it echo in the wood beneath my feet. I hesitated. Part of me wanted to call the police first, but curiosity, or maybe stupidity, dragged me forward. I leaned toward the peephole, and my stomach turned cold. Standing on my porch, her hair windblown, her coat thrown over pajamas, her eyes swollen and hollow, was her. The woman who took my husband. Once my closest friend. Now the person whose name felt like a bruise in my mouth. She looked wrong. Not drunk. Not angry. Not hysterical. Just empty. Her skin was pale like old candle wax. Her lips colorless. Her posture slack, like she was being held up by invisible strings. She didn't blink. She didn't move. She just stood there. I didn't open the door. Instead, I swallowed the knot in my throat and said, through the wood, "What do you want? Go home." My voice barely sounded like mine. For a second, she didn't react. Then, Her mouth opened, and opened wider, and wider, much wider than it should have, too wide. Her jaw stretched impossibly, grotesquely, until it looked like her face might split apart. And from that gaping, unnatural maw came a sound that curdled the blood in my veins. Not a scream, not a cry, a howl. Long, hollow, starving, like an animal locked out in the dead of winter, aching with hunger and rage. The sound vibrated through the door, through the walls, through my spine. And then she started scratching. Her nails dragged down the wood in a slow, scraping rhythm, again and again and again, like she wanted to peel the house open. I don't think words can explain what that does to your mind. How primitive terror takes control of your body before your brain can process meaning. I didn't rationalize. I didn't analyze. I didn't think. I ran. I bolted down the hallway, slammed my bedroom door shut, collapsed into the corner like a terrified animal, and cried. I cried until my throat burned. Outside. She didn't leave. She walked along the house, pacing, circling, dragging her nails across siding and windows, knocking, howling. Sometimes she whispered. Sometimes she giggled a dry, cracked laugh that sounded nothing like the woman I used to know. My phone was on the small table by the front door, on the other side of the wall. Too far, too dangerous. And somehow, it didn't even cross my mind to try. Fear shrinks the world until survival is the only concept left. So I stayed where I was, frozen, listening. The night felt endless. But eventually, the dark began to thin. Dawn crept in, and somewhere between the fading shadows and the pale morning light, she stopped. No footsteps, no scratching, no voice, just silence. When I finally worked up the courage to step outside my bedroom, sunlight already painted the hallway. My legs shook beneath me as I crept to the front door. The porch was empty, the yard still, the street silent. No sign of her. But the door was covered in deep, splintered claw marks. Real. Physical. Proof this hadn't been some hallucination. Proof something real or something wearing reality like a skin had stood there last night. My hands trembled as I reached for the phone. I didn't call the police. I called my ex-husband. Because if he brought this into my life, he damn well needed to answer for it. What my ex-husband told me didn't shock me. Not really. Somewhere deep inside, I think I already knew. His voice trembled when he said it, like even speaking her name hurt. Emily, she's gone. Gone. Not left. Not disappeared. Not missing. Dead. January 1st. The same night I performed the rituals Maria gave me. The same night I called something to my house. The same night I aimed the darkness back at the one who sent it. The woman who stole my husband. The woman who destroyed my home. The woman whose voice used to be warm and familiar. Lydia. Dead. 9 days ago. The exact moment my rituals ended. The exact moment everything shifted. He tried to explain, though the details struggled past his guilt and disbelief. Something about sudden illness. Something about screaming. Something about the way she died that doctors didn't want to talk about. Something about the look on her face, twisted, terrified, like she had seen something the living were never meant to see. I didn't ask many questions. Because deep down, I already knew the answers. And that knowledge was heavier than grief. Heavier than anger. Heavier than guilt. It was condemnation. There was something else my ex-husband said that shook me in a different way. Maria. The woman who helped me. The woman who saw the curse hanging over me. The woman who had looked through my skin and straight into whatever followed me home. She was gone, too. Dead. Somewhere between January 1st and January 9th. No one knew exactly when. No one knew exactly how. Just gone. Like whatever reached for Lydia reached for her, too. Like whatever I had touched didn't loosen its grip easily. I remember standing there with the phone pressed to my ear, my hand numb, my breath shallow, listening to my ex-husband's voice echo through what suddenly felt like a hollow house. 2 deaths. 2 women tied to this darkness. 2 lifelines severed. and I was the one still standing. For now. After that, I didn't go back to any mystics. No more rituals. No more smoke. No more whispered words. I went to the church. A small wooden church on the edge of town, the kind with peeling white paint and a bell that only rang on Sundays. A place people usually passed without noticing, but that somehow felt heavier inside, like something more than wood and nails held it together. The priest didn't look surprised when I told him everything. Not disbelieving. Not mocking. Just deeply sad. He said something I still hear sometimes in restless dreams. Some doors should never be opened, even if we believe we deserve to know what's behind them. He told me what I did was wrong. Not just dangerous. Not just reckless. Wrong. It wasn't my place to return harm. It wasn't my right to redirect darkness. Even if she hurt me, even if she destroyed my life, even if she poisoned everything I loved. You don't fight a monster by becoming one. You don't invite shadows and expect them to leave politely afterward. He didn't scold me. He didn't shame me. He simply prayed. So I did the only thing left for me to do. I prayed, too. Every night. Starting January 1st. Lydia came. Every night. Sometimes quiet. Sometimes violent. Sometimes weeping. Sometimes laughing with a sound that didn't belong to anything human anymore. Sometimes she stood in front of the house. Sometimes she circled it like a hungry animal. Sometimes she leaned against my bedroom window, fogging the glass with something that used to be breath. Sometimes I heard her crawling along the siding. Some nights she appeared at the front door and scratched. Some nights she whispered my name in a broken, echoing murmur. Some nights she just stared. Jaw slack. Eyes hollow. Face swollen with death. Waiting. Expecting. Demanding something I didn't know how to give. And every night, I prayed. Sometimes she vanished the moment the words left my lips. Sometimes she didn't leave until dawn. Sometimes I could feel something tugging at my hair, my clothes, my breath, like invisible hands trying to pull me closer. But I didn't stop. Not even once. Because stopping didn't feel like an option anymore. Stopping felt like surrender. Stopping felt like dying. Stopping felt like inviting her in. Then, one night, she didn't come. And neither did the next. Or the one after. The air stopped feeling heavy. The house stopped breathing with me. The walls stopped listening. The shadows stopped leaning toward me like eager beasts. Everything ended. Just like that. She was gone. And with her, every trace of that curse. My life slowly stitched itself back into something resembling normal. The refrigerator stayed cold. The dog barked again. My child laughed again. Work made sense. Nights became quiet. But quiet isn't always peace. Sometimes quiet is punishment. Sometimes quiet is memory. Sometimes quiet is a reminder. Because even though the darkness left, something else never did. It stayed curled deep inside my skull. And it still lives there. Guilt. A guilt that doesn't fade. A guilt that weighs the soul down in places prayer doesn't reach. A guilt that whispers at night. You didn't survive. You traded places. I don't know if I can ever truly atone. I don't know if forgiveness exists for what I did. I don't know if what left me alone out of mercy, or because it's waiting. But I know one thing for certain. I opened a door I was never meant to touch. And doors like that, never really close,